right. Hello and welcome to the most recent episode of the Smittcamp Family Honors College Fireside Chats. Today, I am excited to share with you Harrison James Schmitt's story and learn a little bit more about him and his experience at Fresno State, as well as what he's doing now. So Harrison graduated from Fresno State in 2018 with a BA in psychology, a minor in Spanish, and a certificate in global awareness. He is now a doctoral candidate in social psychology with a minor in public health at the University of Arizona in Tucson. He is also a National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellow. His research centers on how culture and various forms of disadvantages shape the way that people cope with and make meaning from experiences of suffering. His dissertation focuses on the psychological impact of living through environmental justice issues like water contamination. He will be starting as an assistant professor at Skidmore College in upstate New York in the fall of 2023. Harrison, welcome. So excited to have you today.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. It's great to be able to contribute in some way to Smittcamp.
Yeah, fabulous. So let's start with what led you to choose the Honors College? Share a little bit about where you're from and, just provide a little bit of perspective on your roots.
Yeah, cool. So unlike maybe many of the people in Smittcamp who come from the Central Valley, I actually grew up in Los Angeles, kind of in the suburbs just north of LA. So I was like a slight outsider. Obviously, it's not that far away from Fresno, but I was like a slight outsider in that way. I hadn't really heard of Smittcamp, during high school and things like that. But yeah, basically my mom actually graduated from Fresno State in the late 80s, and she loved it, and I have family in Fresno, and so she kind of encouraged me to just apply and go tour Fresno State and just see what I thought. And so I wasn't that keen about going to Fresno State originally, but then on the tour, actually, like when I toured the campus, somebody mentioned, I'm not sure if the tour guide was in the Smittcamp Family Honors College or if they just mentioned it, but it kind of perked my ears up, like, okay, a full ride, like that sounds pretty cool. So then I just ended up looking more into it and applying. And originally, right, it was just sort of, I was motivated by the fact that it was a full ride scholarship. But then when I came out for the visit day where we, kind of have like a person that we shadow and we kind of see what a day in the life is like for a Smittcamp student, I just realized how much of a kind of community it was and how kind of special the Smittcamp Family Honors College is, especially, when you compare that kind of experience of going through Smittcamp to the typical, like going to a big state school or just like a big university where you're just like a face in the crowd. The, Smittcamp program just really felt like a close-knit community and like great, just like font of opportunities, essentially.
Yeah, I think a lot of students do experience that, where it's initially that scholarship piece that attracts them and gets them interested. And then once really understanding that there's this honors curriculum and a cohort of students that you'll spend 4 years growing with, then that's, I think a much more impactful aspect than the scholarship itself. But, for better or for worse, we don't recognize that early on. And it's that scholarship piece that really gets our attention.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I had a similar experience.
Yeah. So was it difficult for you to pick your major, or tell me about that journey?
Yeah, I was lucky to just have picked psych from the beginning, and then I kind of stuck with it. For me, so actually, again, my mom actually majored in psychology at Fresno State, funny enough. And my mom's a special education teacher for 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. And so I wanted to do something like that, either be a special education teacher or work with autistic kids in some fashion. And so I thought it'd be good to just major in psychology as well and kind of follow that path. And so, yeah, I pretty much just wanted to be like my mom. And she had a good experience with the psych department at Fresno State. And so it seemed like a great option. Obviously, I chose a different path ultimately, but for some reason, for me, it was an easy decision to begin with.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it's great you had that role model in your family of what that career could potentially look like.
Mhm.
At what point did you decide to not follow the special education path and instead go into higher ed?
Yeah, funny enough, I don't think that many people have this experience, but when I took a research methods class in psychology, I just like fell in love with the research process. I think a lot of people tend to get a PhD in spite of having to do research. But for me, it was like, this is so cool. Like you come up with a research question, you get to test it scientifically, you know? And so for whatever reason, my research methods class just kind of clicked. And I decided that I would like to just keep doing research and see what this is all about. And so, yeah, and then at that point, shortly after I took that research methods class, I also took a social psychology class. And so then I started working with my social psych professor doing research outside of class. And then, yeah, the rest is history, as they say.
Oh, that's great. One of the, and I think this is helpful for people to understand. It's something that I didn't understand until I had a colleague who was, debating whether he wanted to get a master's or a PhD. And the advice perspective that was shared with him is that when you get a master's, it's more or less to learn a bit more about it. But PhDs, you're really shaping the way in which people view your discipline, right? And so I think it goes back to the research methods aspect of, really getting into how do we better define, how do we better explain the phenomenon of our discipline. So I don't know if you have any other perspectives from that, but I know when someone shared that with me, I thought it was, a good pause, because we hear these, a master's, a doctorate, but don't really think about what that differentiation is.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great way to think about it. I also think about it sometimes as a difference between like a PhD will give you more, like you're going to be doing research in the domain, and like you said, kind of shaping the way that we think about that area of study by contributing to the original research. And a master's degree is going to be often more kind of practical, like how do you practice in this discipline, right? How do you become a psychologist, for instance? How do you become a therapist or a counselor or something like that? And so, yeah, that's maybe one other way to think about the difference as well.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then how far were you into your college career when you took your methods and social psychology classes?
Yeah, so thanks entirely to the Smittcamp program. I'm not sure if this is still the case, but at least when I was there, we got priority registration for signing up for classes, and that was a huge benefit. So the way the psych major works at Fresno State is that you're first a pre-psychology major, and in order to get into the psychology major proper, you have to take, I think, intro psych, statistics, and a research methods course. And so those classes are often very impacted because everyone needs to take them to get into the major. And so because I had the priority registration with Smittcamp, I was able to knock out all three of those classes in my first year. And so I think it was in my second semester, the spring semester of my first year, I was able to take that research methods class. And so I learned pretty early on that this was like something I was super interested in. And that let me, then have lots of time to spend getting involved in research activities outside of the classroom. So that was super lucky. And then same thing, I think the very next semester, so at the beginning of my second year, I took social psychology. So I really kind of found what I liked early on. And that was thanks entirely to, Smittcamp helping me get into those classes earlier.
Yeah, that's a great story to accelerate that definition of where you wanted to go, right? And then be able to focus. So
yeah,
that's
for sure.
Cool. So let's talk about your experience at Fresno State. What is your favorite memory?
It's so hard. I had such a good time at Fresno State. I mean, the things that come readily to mind are things like Smittcamp camp, like lots of great memories with that. But also, like I've met some of my best friends through Smittcamp. So just all of the things that I did with my best friends that I met in Smittcamp come to mind. And then, yeah, I think otherwise, I also played in the jazz band at Fresno State. So I have a lot of great memories playing with the bands, and we went to like the Reno Jazz Festival and stuff like that. So I was able to do a lot of fun things like by being involved in, the arts broadly.
Yeah, that's great. Anything you would have done differently?
Let's see. I was pretty lucky, honestly, so it's hard to come up with things I would have done differently. I guess I would have maybe spent a semester like studying abroad, or longer studying abroad. I did take 2 trips over the summer. So I went to Fiji as part of the service learning trip through Fresno State over the summer 1 year, and then I went to Peru over a different summer. And those were great experiences. I have no regrets about that. I just think it would have been cool to spend longer time, like take a semester and go and experience something new for longer. But yeah.
And you mentioned service learning. Can you talk a little bit more about the community service requirement aspect, and then what that is like?
Yeah. Let's see. So with the service learning trip, I forget now, I think it was through the Richter Center at Fresno State, at least partially through them. But there was a program that was basically set up where Fresno State and other people at the Richter Center and so on had kind of this working, ongoing relationship with a small village in rural Fiji. And so I was able to take a trip and spend a few weeks in that village over the summer of 2016, I believe. And so it was really great. It was just a lot of, kind of intimate cultural exchange, right? And like experiencing those like deep culture clashes, like, front and center. But then also we got the opportunity to help out on various construction projects in the village. So we worked to construct like a community kitchen, and also to find the village a new water source. And so it's great because you're helping out in some ways, but you're also getting this really intimate kind of cultural exchange experience. But then more broadly, I think it is really great that Smittcamp requires different kinds of community service and so on. I do actually have a lot of great memories of like weird community service events that we did as part of Smittcamp, things that like would just come up, be advertised to us because of Smittcamp and so on. For instance, this is one time there was like a children's benefit carnival at one of the local hospitals in Fresno. And so we went and just like helped run games at this carnival at the children's hospital. But then they needed somebody to dress up in like a mascot costume. And so I was just like running a game or something, and they came up to me and were like, "Hey, do you want to put this giant minion costume on?" And so like I spent the next few hours like running around in this giant minion costume with like one little eye to see through. So it's just like really random things like that. That I don't know, those are honestly some of my favorite memories from Smittcamp as well. And it just felt really good to be able to give back to the community in these various ways, and be kind of a resource to the local community in that way.
Yeah, that's great. So you mentioned that on your service learning trip to Fiji, helping to find a water source, did that inspire your dissertation?
It's funny, not directly, I wouldn't say, but there is kind of a funny connection between those things in a different way. So I was actually already involved in doing research before I went on that service learning trip. I worked with Dr. Bob Levine on things related to the psychology of time and happiness and well-being. And I told him that I was going to Fiji, and he's like, "Hey, do you want to interview people in Fiji and do some research while you're there?" And so I was able to bring some of our research material and actually interview people in Fiji, in this rural village in Fiji, about how they think about time and happiness and all these different things. So that had a much more direct impact on just how I think about research and the way that I conduct research. So yeah, it's funny, I haven't really thought much about the water thing, but I will say, I mean, just in terms of thinking about environmental issues in a broad sense, my trip to Fiji really did kind kind of help me wrap my head around things like climate change and so on. So one of the reasons that the village needed a new water source is because of like climate related drought that had occurred. And there's also like rapidly rising sea levels that are really impacting this village. And so it was a really kind of stark demonstration of kind of the impacts of something like climate change for people's just livelihoods and so on. And so that's definitely something that I brought with me into my work on, environmental justice issues.
Yeah.
Dissertation.
Yeah, I'm sure it's been, an acclimation or the buildup, accumulation of items over time that ultimately shapes, your perspective. And so. All right, so let's transition to what you're doing now. So it sounds like you're wrapping up and then we'll be starting a full-time position come the fall.
Yeah, that's right.
So share with people, I guess, what does this look like? Is it kind of like a easy semester for you, or what's going on, just generally speaking, for people like myself who aren't in academia and don't know what all of this means?
Yeah, for sure. So like I said, I'm in my 5th year of a Ph.D. program in social psychology at the University of Arizona, which is in Tucson. And this semester is not easy, but it's kind of because of a lot of random things. So I'm really I'm done with all my coursework. So this is something that often happens in a PhD program after maybe 3.5, 4 years. People tend to finish all of the classes that they're supposed to take. And so I finished my classes last spring. And so now I'm mostly just working on my dissertation, so collecting data and writing up my dissertation, which will be kind of the document to summarize the research that I've done on environmental justice issues here in Tucson. And so that's kind of my main task. It's supposed to be my main task this semester, but I'm also teaching an undergrad social psychology course. And so that's actually taking up most of my time right now. But it's a lot of fun. I really love teaching, and this is my first time actually teaching a full course on my own. So it's great to be able to just share my passion for social psychology with other students. But that's kind of what I have going on this semester.
Okay, great. So let's see. And then I have heard that, the psychology field is being very impacted now because, through the pandemic, there was a lot of pressures on individuals' mental health. And so can you speak directly to how you're seeing that emphasis in your world and what you're doing?
So my area of psychology is not necessarily like the clinical side, although I definitely do research on things like mental health and well-being. But I definitely see from my friends that are getting their PhDs in clinical psychology or who are already clinical psychologists. There's definitely been a change over the past few years. Sometimes in positive ways and sometimes in not so positive ways. So I think there's been some kind of lifting of the stigma around mental health and seeking mental health care. And so I think that's a good thing, that people are more willing and interested in seeking mental health care. But then that also puts more of a burden on the already kind of thin field of people working in mental health care. And so I do know that right now there are things like shortages of therapists, and it's hard to find a therapist or a counselor with openings right now and things like that. So it's definitely kind of a mixed bag. It's good that the stigma is being lifted, but we definitely need more people to go into psychology, people who are passionate about mental health and mental health care, to work for this, on this kind of increasing demand for mental health care.
Mm-hmm. And are you seeing a broader or a higher interest in, research that you're doing in other areas because there is, I think, more dialogue in general, or is it kind of similar to what we saw 5 years ago?
I do feel like there is coming to be more interest. So my kind of sub area that I'm doing my dissertation on and so on has to do with the mental health impact of environmental issues, right? And I'm not sure if this is because of the pandemic or what, but I think people are more interested now in how things like climate change and climate anxiety and so on are impacting people's mental health and well-being. But also with climate change, we have, increasing prevalence of things like natural disasters and so on. And so I think people are starting to just be more interested in general in research about, what are the mental health impacts of living through these kinds of environmental issues. And so I have seen a growth over the past 3 years for sure in terms of how much people are interested in and thinking about environmentally related stress and so on.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, how, broadly speaking, how do you define success?
It's a good question. I think at one time I probably thought of success mostly in terms of like becoming, a rock star academic, getting the big publications and these, big grants and things like that. But more and more, I think I'm just sort of thinking of success in terms of just like being happy and having healthy relationships. So I don't know, I think mostly about success as just being like surrounded with people that I love and having good food and so on. So I think, and I think having that kind of definition of success is probably helpful, right? We live in a time that's pretty uncertain and, job markets are difficult and things like that in the present. And so I think having your success defined at least in part by, your relationships and the people around you and so on is probably pretty helpful in that way.
Yeah, for sure. Especially when we think about, those big milestones of getting a big grant or having your work published. That's not something that happens on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
And so you might get that big hit of like, I've made it. But then once that wears off, then you're still left with, the day-to-day hassles. And so rather than constantly chasing those big monumental things, I think that it's a much better way to be living, to define it in terms of the relationships we have on a day-to-day basis and, and having nice things like good food. So
yeah, for sure.
But it is interesting how I think that changes over time for a lot of people, because, I think we all start out at least thinking, all right, we're going to conquer the world.
Mm-hmm.
And then, it's not the straight path we want it to be. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So can you share if you've handled certain habits to handle stress? What have you, what's your go-to or the most typically used in your toolbox?
Yeah, let's see. Lately, something that has been really good for me, I ride my bike into campus. And so it's really nice to it's like about a 4-mile ride one way. So it's a good chunk of time where I'm like getting some exercise, which is good for stress in general, on the way and on the way home from work. But then it's also a great time because it's like, 20 minutes where I can just like process, what I need to do during the day. And then when I'm on my way home, like process, what's happened during the day or what I got done or didn't get done and so on. So it's kind of giving me the exercise factor and also just like the time to process what's going on in my life. So that's been a really helpful thing. And then the other thing, I still am involved in, playing music outside of work. And so, being involved in the music scene here in Tucson has been super great and a great kind of release from just the day-to-day, goings on.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're keeping busy between, school and anything else that's a hobby or a passion area for you?
Yeah, I mean, I really like cooking. I think a lot of people got more into cooking during the pandemic. And so, yeah, I got much more serious about my home cooking during the pandemic. And so that's also something that I like to just spend time doing. And it's nice because it's very concrete tasks to get done, I need to cut this onion right now. It's like I'm thinking about cutting the onion, I'm not my mind isn't elsewhere. I'm super present while I'm cooking. So that's something else that I've been really enjoying over the past few years.
Oh, that's great. And how are you still engaged with the Honors College, or how, and because some people become readers or, stay involved in various ways. I'm curious if you found time for that recently.
Yeah, not so much recently, but over the past few years, I have been involved maybe a little more indirectly through kind of mentoring or advising people, especially in terms of like applying for grad school and prepping all the crazy materials that you need to get together for grad apps and things like that. And so I've done quite a bit of kind of advising and helping people to prep those. Although that's slowed down now in the past few years, just because most people that I went to Smittcamp with are no longer there. So I don't have as much direct connection anymore, but I think it would be great to get involved in other ways as well.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what you've expressed as part of the benefits of being in the Honors College and having that network of individuals who you can, call and they can help guide you through. So you've got that experienced perspective rather than just navigating it alone. So that's great.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely benefited from that as a student in the Smittcamp program, kind of having these older people to look up to that are further ahead in the program or have already graduated. It was great to have them just as kind of resources to learn about the field and what it's like after you graduate and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yep. All right. We'll transition to rapid fire questions. Okay. So tell me, what was your favorite course?
Ooh, I mean, partially I just have to say that social psychology was one of my favorite courses because it's kind of defined the trajectory of my life to this point. But also, I really enjoyed, there was an honors course. I took my very first semester. It was like an honors drama course. And it was kind of like a survey course of contemporary American theater. And I love that course. I think about stuff we read and discussed in that class like all the time. And like at the time I was like, why am I taking this class? But now I'm like, I just think about it all the time. It was like super impactful.
Yeah, that's awesome. How about a favorite professor?
Definitely Dr. Levine was amazing. And again, like I said, shaped the trajectory of my life. Outside of psychology, I might have to say Richard Giddens. He was the jazz band director when I was there, and he was just so passionate and amazing. So probably Richard Giddens.
Oh, that's awesome. How about your favorite place to eat?
Oh man, I miss some of the food in Fresno for sure. Go-to was probably just Robertito's veggie burrito, and then also Little Peking. It's a Chinese place close to campus.
Nice. What did you order at Little Peking?
Well, so I'm vegan, so they have like the most incredible just like vegetarian and vegan menu. So there's all kinds of crazy fake meats and weird stuff. So I would always go with friends and we'd get a whole array of stuff. So
awesome. And then what is something your classmates would be surprised to hear that you're doing now?
Oh, let's see. Oh, probably that I'm playing drums in a country band. I think I said loudly and often that I hate country music when I was an undergrad. But now I spend a lot of time playing country music. And I love it now. So it's kind of funny.
Yeah, that is. Yeah. So what would you say is the most exciting part of your life right now?
Well, I'm getting married in a few weeks, so that's very exciting.
Yes, congratulations.
Thank you.
And what book are you reading now?
I'm reading 2 books. One's more academic. It's called Anointed with Oil. It's about how the oil industry has shaped culture in America. And then I'm reading through all the Dune books right now. So I'm almost done with the 3rd book in the Dune series.
Got it. And what book have you reread multiple times or have gifted to others frequently?
Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut.
Got it. And last question, what is one piece of advice you would give to college students?
I think don't be afraid to like do weird things at Fresno State. Like take all the classes, take weird classes outside of your major, take a minor that's not related to your field. I think Fresno State and Smittcamp in particular gives you a lot of opportunities to just do and try weird different things. And that kind of breadth was super beneficial to me. And I think people should take advantage of it as much as possible.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think especially oftentimes people get in and they're like, okay, this is where I want to go. This is what I need to do. And it's this tunnel vision without really taking in all the different opportunities that can have a big impact and maybe take you on a different, tangent than what you anticipated originally, which isn't always a bad thing. So
yeah, for sure. I minored in Spanish while I was at Fresno State, and that's been so helpful. It wasn't super helpful for me at the time, I think. I mean, it was like fun and interesting, but now it's been so helpful. I use Spanish in my research all the time, working with folks in Southside Tucson. So that was super helpful. And then just other things like I took a massage class at Fresno State that like personally has been very beneficial, and it was awesome. So stuff like that, I think just go for it,
Yeah, yep, for sure. All right. Well, Harrison, thank you so much for your time today. I do appreciate you sharing your journey and then also the bits of advice you've shared. And we will be sure to include information on how people can get in touch with you. So thank you.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much. It was nice to meet you, and thanks for having me on.